Thanks to Juno, Ramattra has gotten right back into the spotlight. He's one of the best heroes for playing the latest rush comp that's all about sustaining hard and pushing hard, and that's pretty much what Ramattra does best. He's been a decent hero since he got the 20% speed boost on his Nemesis form, so without any more waffling, let's get into the guide. Why Ramattra is so good, and the best way to use him to win games. Ram is one of the most flexible heroes across all roles. Having two different forms, even though one is on a cooldown, allows him to deal effective damage depending on the enemy's defenses, as well as block damage depending on their attacks. Starting off simple, Ram's Omnic form is what you'll be spending the most time in. Even if you wanted to spam Nemesis form as many times as you can, you'll be having your staff out for the majority of the game. So first off, let's look at his base health bar. It's obviously very important for a tank to be able to tank, but Ram's Omnic form has the lowest health out of the entire role. He's also got the least armor out of all the tanks who have it, so he's actually quite weak to getting spammed out. So with that in mind, let's add the primary fire to the mix. His Void Accelerator, or simply his staff for short, makes up for his low health. Although it's not always consistent, he has a longer range and more constant damage than any other tank. He fires projectiles that deal 125 DPS, and with no fall off and only a single second to reload, there's a lot you can do with just mouse 1. Before getting into any other abilities, you can do a lot with just your staff and armor. Only Orisa can compare to his ranged pressure, and while she deals a measly 5 more damage per second, she has a bigger hitbox than Ram's Omnic form, meaning that even with way more base armor, she'll take a lot more damage than Ram will. Before the fight even starts, look to constantly spam early. Aiming at headshot height or slightly lower against the skinnier hitboxes will net you a lot of solid damage, and any early damage forces the enemy team to slow down and heal up. Keep in mind that a lot of supports nowadays deal a lot of damage, so if you force them to heal instead, you'll be saving your team from a lot of pressure. Even if you're not dealing as much damage as your DPS are, you can be more consistent, and with a steady stream of projectiles, you can help your team out a lot by preventing enemies from peaking an angle by spamming it hard. Think maps like Eichenwald 2nd, where attackers have to walk into so many different high grounds. Ram can pressure enemies out even for just a second to get some breathing room, and then use his secondary fire to walk his team up, that being his shield. The second part of Ram's Omnic form is his Void Barrier, a 1000 HP shield that lasts for 4 seconds. If the enemy team wants to break it early, they'll have to deal more than 250 damage per second. You can really trust the shield, and with such a strong effect and a 13-second cooldown, you don't want to waste it. Because of the static placement of the shield and the short duration, it's best to use aggressively, or in direct reaction to an enemy push. It's easy to decide which. If you're on attack or need to take space, shield your team forward to peek a corner together. Make sure that teammates that benefit from the protection are with you for the swing, and look to connect the shield to a wall or cover. Although the shield is tough to break, any openings on the sides of the shield can be exploited. You don't want your team to think they're safe and then get shot through a small gap that could have been avoided with a slight positional adjustment. As for using the ability defensively, you'll want to hold on to it until you can guarantee that it'll get value. Basically, you'll want to be sure that the enemy team has committed and they can't back off, and that your shield will actually block important abilities and damage. Some team compositions can completely surpass your shield, unlike Zarya with 2 bubbles, Winston with a massive shield area, Reinhardt with his constant shield, and so on and so forth. Ram's shield can only really block damage from the front, not from above or the sides. And since it's a one-time use, blocking abilities like Earth Shatter or even just Biotic Nade can be tough, since you can't use the shield to take space without leaving yourself vulnerable to getting punished. When you're in this type of situation where blocking the ability is really important, but you don't want to slow down the game too much, look to bait the enemy team into pushing you, or use your staff damage to pressure the enemies that want to drop their skill shots as soon as your shield is down. Using the shield is usually uncomplicated, and it cycles perfectly into Ram's signature ability, Nemesis form. Now we're finally getting into the meat of the character. We may be spending most of our time in Omnic form, but with 300 more armor, more burst damage, and a disgusting amount of damage reduction on a near 0-second cooldown, Nemesis form is the real playmaker, exchanging the staff for massive piercing 10.5 meter punches, and the shield for a 75% damage reducing front-facing block makes this ability one of the best in the game. If Ramattra was in Nemesis form all the time, he would probably be the best character, even with his limited range. Starting with his punches, not only are they easy to hit, but they pass through matrix abilities and shields alike, and with 65 damage per punch, their damage is only reduced by around 15% into armor, compared to his regular staff damage being completely cut in half. Even if you engage your form without softening enemies up first, that punch damage can break armor or kill enemies from 100 to 0, and with the aforementioned 10.5 meter range, you can chase kills pretty far. Despite having a big hitbox, just like Fire Strike, the punches won't be blocked by walls or cover as long as the center of your crosshair is aimed at your target. You can finish off close kills and tilt your enemies by seemingly killing them from behind walls. And with infinite punches for the duration, look to hit as many of them as you can. The only defensive abilities that can negate the damage are Deflect, Javelin Spin, and Zarya Bubbles, so use that unstoppable damage to burst heroes who think they're safe. The second part of Nemesis form is the block. Secondary fire now brings your arms up for a massive 75% damage reduction, and combined with armor that blocks up to 50% of damage on its own, you're effectively invincible during the effect, at least if you play your cards right. Although Ramattra takes minimal damage from the front, the block slows him down, and damage still goes through. Even 75% damage reduction won't save you from 5 players shooting at you for the entire duration. Just like you would with your shield and regular tank positioning, use covers and corners to minimize the damage you take, and to make sure that you can't be surrounded. Ram is one of the best tanks for moving to corner, inching up with his shield first, then his form, and combining his block and punch to take over the fight. Most tanks can handle enemy aggression really well. Ram even says it in one of his Nemesis form voice lines. "They will target me, let them." If enemies are shooting you, that's great for your team. What you should look to do when occupying enemy attention is to take as little damage as you can while dealing as much damage as you can. It sounds simple, and it is. If you're against 1 or 2 enemies, you don't even have to block immediately. Armor is just that good, so you can keep punching without slowing down for maximum damage. If upwards of 3 enemies can see you, there's no need to only block. You can weave in your punches, blocking, then punching, and quickly blocking again. You'll be taking full damage for the split second that you punch, but once again, armor is just that good. And finally, if the whole enemy squad is facing you, either because they're really trying to kill you or you accidentally swung wide into 5 players, it's best to just block the damage. By reducing 75% of the damage you take, you're pretty much completely wasting their bullets if just one of your healers is helping you. It can be tempting to weave in your punches so that you're still contributing to getting kills instead of just being a tank, but you can very quickly get bursted if enemies are already shooting you. Some heroes will do more damage than others. So another way to determine how much you should block and punch is your armor level. 75% is a massive amount of damage reduction regardless of the armor, so you can go for more punches until that yellow health starts getting low, at which point you can block, get healed up, and then adapt to the situation. Besides dealing damage and blocking it, Ram also has some of the strongest tank utility in the game. His Ravenous Vortex that deals 23 DPS, applies a 40% slow, as well as pulling enemies to the ground, making them easier to shoot as well as preventing escapes. At an 11-second cooldown, it's also on the longer side. Ram's Nemesis form is constant pressure, but his shield and vortex require more precision to make sure they don't get wasted. Because Ram's neutral damage is so good, both in his Omnic and Nemesis form, you don't need to use the slow too early. It works best as a reactive ability, slowing teams trying to push forward, or for setting up a kill after defensive abilities have been used. The area of effect is relatively small, and the projectile can be easily blocked, so take your time deciding when to go for it. The Vortex cooldown used to be a second longer, but 11 seconds is still a long time between slows, and because it only deals a maximum of 70 damage compared to a similar ability, Roadhog's Pigpen with up to 195, it's not ideal for building early ultimate charge. You can also use the Vortex in both forms, and both options are decent. While in your Omnic form, you can deal more burst damage with your headshots, while in your Nemesis form, you can take more space while locking your targets in place. To finish off with the ultimate, Annihilation is simple. Your Nemesis form gets activated or refreshed if used while it's already active, and 30 damage per second is dealt to enemies in your line of sight within 13 meters. Only shields will block that damage over time, and as long as you keep dealing damage, you'll extend the duration of the ultimate for a maximum of 20 seconds. Although a key part of the ultimate is keeping it up for as long as you can, you'll definitely want to finish the fight with your extra damage fast. With every punch dealing 65 damage, that extra 30 damage per second means enemies can get bursted much faster. Even if they do get healing, the constant damage ticking will force enemy supports to be on the defensive. It's the type of ultimate that makes you feel like you're invincible, so make sure that you don't go in too deep. Blocking will extend the ultimate and keep your team moving forward, but you have to be careful. If the damage adds up, like when you're facing 5 players, or walking in the open where some enemies can see your back and deal full damage, you can end up getting killed or brought low enough that you'll be on the back foot for the rest of the fight. Remember that tanks are best at tanking, not killing, even if they have gotten way more lethal lately. If you're in a rank where the enemy team just isn't properly focusing you and letting you run rampant, by all means, take those free picks. But as a tank, you should be primarily focused on getting more space for your team, allowing your teammates to comfortably play for their own win conditions. As Ram, surviving, forcing out or blocking off strong angles, and pressing forward with your damage-soaking abilities is the best way to constantly win games as a tank should. To finish off the video, let's quickly run over the specific playstyles you'll have to use against anything the enemy team can offer. Against teams with more spam and range damage, you'll want to close the distance and then rush in with your pummel damage to take away the safe positions they can spam from. Even against comps that just barely have more damage than you, because they'll win the fight if it goes on for too long, use your shield and Nemesis form to consistently approach, and then commit when you've gotten close enough. Ram isn't like Mauga, who can run in from far away and stomp with overdrive to initiate, so don't rush it. Because Ram's Omnic form is so good at sustaining spam, you don't need to shield, form, and run in from 30 meters away. Remember that teams with more long-range damage won't be able to fight you in close range. Use your shield and form to first get in position to either take the objective or take the positions that the enemies are using to pressure the objective. and then use your second cycle of abilities to engage. Get creative with your positioning. Ram's staff damage has amazing range, so even high ground positions can benefit you if it's the best way to force out players that have strong sightlines. In situations where the enemy team instead has better brawl than yours, and will look to run your team over, look to slow them down. As long as you're not out in the open, the enemy team won't be able to kill you even with great focus fire, so look to protect your team by shielding off the backline, slowing the enemy team as they try to push past you, and then punching either the supports or the attackers that are immediately threatening your team. It's the opposite situation to playing against teams with more spam. You'll win the fight by just spamming your projectiles, so only use your abilities proactively if the enemy team is way too far away to commit. And finally, the most complicated matchup. Against dive-type teams with mobility that look to surround your team, you'll need to either go faster than the time it takes for them to set up, pushing any target you can 1v1, or rotate away from the positions that your opponents are taking, setting up a safe space with your shield and Nemesis form damage for your team. It can be really hard, especially when there are a lot of high grounds and not a lot of team communication. So if you can keep the early damage pressure on with your staff, or bait enemies to push you instead of your more vulnerable team, you can make the situation a lot more manageable. That's it for the Ultimate Ramattra Guide. Good luck in your games. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.